Hey everybody, welcome again to the HR in Action podcast. Today's special guest is Amanda Zeidman. She is the founder and principal consultant at A to Z Human Resource Consulting. And we've already had a few very fun discussions over the past few weeks. So I know we're going to get into some good stuff today about maybe performance management, some other related leadership and HR topics. So let's kick off. And Amanda, I'll turn it over to you if you don't mind doing a little introduction, and we'll go from there.
Well, thanks so much for having me and letting me talk about anything and everything. We'll see where this goes. But I have 25 years experience in human resources. I truly love it. Sometimes people think you must be joking. I'm like, no, this is what I want to be doing. I came up through the ranks on the HR generalist, HR business partner train, semiconductors during the dot-com boom, displays as e-readers were becoming a thing, medical device and technology, and then social media when it was in its heyday, before everybody started having lots and lots of feelings about social media. But through most of that time, I've been an HR business partner working with engineering teams, manufacturing and operations, communications and public policy. So I've been able to partner with a lot of different sides of the business, which has been great. And when I was at Meta a few years ago, I took an opportunity to change roles from HR business partnership into program management because a role came open to become the director of performance. Now at Meta, like a lot of places, but particularly at Meta, performance and performance management is kind of one of the biggest known HR programs. People have a lot of opinions about it, of course, and I do too. And so when a role came open, I thought, here's my chance to actually take a leadership role in shaping the future of the program, not just have opinions on the sideline. I thought it was only fair to put my money where my mouth was. So I took on a leadership role in the people experience team, leading performance for a couple of years, which involved redesigning the program. So that was a lot of fun. I moved on from Meta to go to a much smaller health tech company because I wanted an opportunity to help another company scale and grow, like I had seen over the years in other tech companies. So moved to a smaller startup. And was working with them for a while. And then in November 2024, decided to go out on my own. And with a name like Amanda Zeidman, with those initials, how can you not make a play on it? And so A to Z Human Resources Consulting was born. And now, because it is my first true love in the HR space, I spend a lot of my time working on performance programs with clients. Everything from thousands of people in energy companies to dozens of people in nonprofits and everything in between, helping them with defining, enhancing, up-leveling, upskilling their performance programs, and also working with them on feedback in general, leadership development, and really kind of helping organizations thrive. So that's what I'm up to these days.
Awesome. So before we jump into the performance management, I got to ask a little bit because I've never been in the tech sector, right? And you're up in San Francisco, I think, right? In the area?
Yes, I'm in Northern California.
Yeah. So what's it like working for a company like Facebook or Meta? What are the pros and cons?
So I was at Meta for about 9 years, back when it was Facebook, and then when it became Meta over time. And it was a wild ride. When I joined, there was under 7,000 people. And by the time I left, there was over 87,000.
Wow.
So growth was massive. And that brings with it so much opportunity and challenge. Like, how do you scale? How do you, maintain and evolve your culture over that time? And I think that's something that, I honestly have a lot of respect for Meta's leadership team in those years, kind of helping to guide the team through those changes. Because when you're bringing in that many people, especially all at once, any organization can kind of only absorb so much at a time. But we found ways to make it work. And I think a lot of that was a really, really clear-eyed focus on mission and ensuring that work that we were doing aligned to that. So whether you're an engineer, I worked with the infrastructure team, so both engineering and data centers. really kind of powering a lot of the business. But even within HR too, we would ask ourselves, how does this align with the mission? If we are trying to make the world more open and connected, which was the mission at the time when I started, was how it was kind of defined, is everything we're doing in service of that? And so when we ask ourselves that question, if the answer is yes, great, keep going, let's explore. If it's not, then I think we need to ask ourselves, is this the best use of our time? Is it going to help us learn and grow that ultimately will get us to that place? Great. If not, let's set it aside and focus on the things that do matter. And so by doing that, what we found was employees were really, really strongly connected to the mission. And you could look at any business unit, any location really around the world. If you were to look at their engagement scores, we would see that strong connection there. People could articulate the values, could articulate what it was we were trying to do. And they were really committed to making that happen. So that was a really big part of scaling. And then the other thing I'll shout out is they've actually got a really strong management and leadership team in terms of frontline managers, mid-level managers. We invested a lot in helping them succeed. They're the people that employees interact with most. So if you have a trusting relationship, a strong relationship with your manager, you're bound to be more engaged and probably higher performing overall. So the more we could do to invest in management capability, the more that helped with everything from performance to engagement to scaling, because they had those relationships they could leverage. But yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that's insane growth. And if you don't define the culture, I guess the culture, I'm sure, sort of morphed over time. But I guess staying towards that mission was a way that
It was a really big piece of it, and I think transparency also was a big part of, um, feeling like you could ask questions, you could raise concerns, leadership would jump in and answer questions. Internally at the time, I'm a little less close to it now, so I don't want to speak for what it's like today, but certainly while I was there, all of the internal communication flowed through Facebook at first, like a workplace instance of Facebook, and then a product called Workplace, which was basically Facebook for Business. And you could, leaders would post, updates. People could ask questions in the comments. They would engage. There would be a lot of dialogue, and also the community was quite self-regulating, especially when we're smaller, right? Because it's small enough, a few thousand people, that you tended to know a lot of folks who kind of come up together over the years. Over time, as it got bigger as a company, that became challenging, because then a company of that size is really kind of a microcosm of the internet itself, right? So in the comments that you end up with, the internet comments that you sometimes get elsewhere. And I think culturally, employees really try to call out and say, hey, that's not cool. That's not really how we would communicate. Or, maybe could you say this a little bit better? And so we certainly saw that, and that helped a lot with culture, especially at those beginning stages of big growth, to try to maintain a sense of this is who we are, this is how we operate, how we communicate with each other, how we demonstrate respect to one another. It gets harder the bigger we get, but always something I think that we tried to keep in mind.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah, I think of there's almost some irony in the mission too, where it's the original goal was to connect people. And I think in the beginning, for Facebook anyway, not that I want to go down this road too far with Facebook, but Facebook, I think I was in college or late high school when Facebook came out, and I was at University of Kansas. It was one of the first schools that they opened it up to. So I think I started my account 99 or 2000.
Oh my goodness, so early
anymore. Yeah, so this is that was pretty super early, I think. But then, as they started adding more and more people, and then they opened it up to the public from the universities. But then the science started to show that there was this false sense of connection that you get from all the likes and the attention, and it became kind of a problem. And so that's not really an HR thing, but I guess it is sort of a psychology type of thing of I guess my question would be like, did that come up in the culture at all in terms of like these criticisms and stuff of what social media was
Absolutely.
doing, and whether Facebook really was actually living their mission of connecting people? I mean, they were connecting people, but were they actually creating connection? You know what I mean?
Right. So I think in what you're saying, there's a couple of things that stand out for me. One is, are we creating meaningful connection or the illusion of
Right.
connection?
Meaningful
Right.
keyword. Yeah.
And we think about that as employers and HR professionals too. Like, do people have a meaningful connection to the company and the mission, to their colleagues, to their manager? Does that connection exist? Or are we just paying it lip service? Right. And then I think to the broader question of like, is the company connecting people meaningfully or not for, I'll put in air quotes, good, because everyone's definition of connecting for good, could look quite different.
Of course.
I think that's when, for me, and I would peg this around 2018, maybe 2017, 18, 19, where um, I think for me and for a lot of colleagues that I've talked to, that's when we started to ask ourselves questions too about um, this is in service of a mission that we say, but is it the mission that we still believe in? The world around us has changed. We have been a part of changing the world around us. Let's be honest, we need to own our role in that, you
Sure.
know. And given that situation, like what does that mean? It's no longer, a bunch of college kids across the country just kind of, doing their thing. Now it's political and societal and cultural, and it carries much more weight. Everything that we do or don't do or change. Um,
Yeah.
and to think at that scale, I mean, let alone the scale of the company size itself, but the orders of magnitude that a business can have on the world is, I'm not sure anything that anyone ever imagined, at the start.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
and that's when you see things like the mission evolves, right? The ways of working evolve because they kind of need to in response to what's going on
Yeah.
around us. But it's hard because then you've got folks that have been there for a really long time with a particular way of working and a particular set of values. And then that's changing. And then you have a little bit of like, does this still serve me? Like, is this still a place I want to be? Does it, serve my career goals and my personal values? And we would see a lot of times that would happen. People kind of wondering about that. Being in tech in 2020 was a very wild ride. I think a lot of industries went through this, but certainly, tech employees in general, I think, are known for being pretty outspoken and pushing back and questioning, leadership. And you could say for better or for worse, I suppose, depending again on how you view, doing something for good. Um, but that was something that I think as leaders, as HR professionals, I never really come across before. Like, again, because the world had changed a bit. So, we're always learning and we're always experiencing new things. And so trying to navigate, how do you deal with that sort of pushback? How do you deal with um, answering questions that might be uncomfortable, but are very, valid questions to ask? And how do you support leaders who are trying to respond in a way that balances like recognizing the person and their genuine concerns, and also we've got a business to run and things that we need to get done, and how do we thread that needle can be tough.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's crazy. I work for the government. They're obviously a massive
Yeah,
organization and bureaucracy, but other than that, it's been, all small businesses. So, nothing that has that type of societal impact, especially, in the tech side where it's like literally changing,
yeah,
the culture of society and stuff. So
absolutely.
it's super interesting. So now moving into performance management, which is key for that, right? Because the way
Mhm.
that people lead, and in the tech sector in particular, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you hear about just toxic cultures and leadership and that kind of stuff. It sounds like you didn't necessarily experience some of the really nasty stuff. Hopefully, I don't know, but what's kind of what are your focus areas and stuff as you're doing a lot of this performance management work?
So the reason I love performance management so much, in particular, as compared to like pick any other kind of ownership area in HR and talent, like
Right.
recruitment or benefits or employee
Right.
listening or other things, is that I see performance as a lever by which you can adjust and evolve a company's culture. Because if you think about what are the things that we are recognizing, reinforcing, what are we really doubling down on, and celebrating people who achieve X or demonstrate Y, different behaviors or ways of working. Or if we want to kind of shift away from something, we could adjust again in performance how we really kind of highlight these things and reward and recognize them. Um, the performance program is a reflection of the culture, but also at the leading edge of pushing the culture too. And so I just think it's so fascinating what you can do with that. And I will go on for days, but I promise that I won't like pull me back if I wander too much afield. But I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example from Meta and an example from a current client that I'm working with now. At Meta, while I was there, we changed the performance program, which used to be every 6 months, ratings, reviews, the whole 9 yards. And we evolved it to be a once a year rating instead. And a
Wait,
big
wait,
draw.
wait. You evolved it to do less meetings?
Yes, fewer
So that's
meetings.
super interesting because you would think like most companies are actually moving towards smaller, more
Yes, more
often
bite
kind of
size.
one-on-one type of things, but you did the
And
opposite.
and I did read an article just in the last couple 3 weeks maybe that Meta has maybe moved some of it back towards that now. It's been
Interesting.
a couple of
Okay.
years. So they try. This is very common for a tech company, right? They'll experiment for a couple of years,
Oh, of
they'll see
course.
how it
Yeah, yeah.
goes,
Okay.
learn from
No,
it,
sorry. Didn't want to
take what
interrupt,
works.
but that caught me by surprise. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, they evolved it to less interaction.
So here's the thing that when you have a program that is um, very detailed. um, it was
Okay.
you end up creating a lot of process. And
Oh,
process
oh,
doesn't always
sure.
scale, but people are used to it. And you talk about how do you go from 7,000 to 87,000. We were running aside from like having to move everything remote because of COVID. Fundamentally, we were managing performance and calibrations the same way we had been from the time I started and probably long before I started, right? And
Hmm.
along the way, we would always ask ourselves, does, this served us at 500 people? Does it still serve us at 5,000? Does it still serve us at 50,000? Probably not, but it's what we know. It's what we're comfortable with. Managers understand it. Leaders grew up in it, so they are quite comfortable with it. But it creates a lot of swirl and a lot of time and energy spent kind of hyper optimizing for these 6 month cycles. And so you're kind of constantly on a bit of a hamster wheel trying to always be preparing for a cycle in the middle of it, recovering from it from a couple of weeks, and then you start the whole thing again. It feels like it's a little longer, in between, but it kind of felt like it. And as the company was growing and taking on so many of the technology things that they're working on now, you can't solve it in a 6 month cycle, right? You need longer periods of time to be able to work on some of these new technologies. And so looking at, if we extend our goal setting cycle from these quick turn quarterly and every 6 months into more annual planning, certainly we had annual plans. I don't mean that we didn't, but kind of tying implied goals to these longer cycles, giving things time to grow and expand. Um, then we wanted to reward and recognize on those cycles as well, assess along those same cycles. We kept promos at every 6 months because we certainly didn't want to hold back anybody's growth on the promotion track due to a rating change. But we went to doing ratings twice a year instead of once. or doing it once, excuse me, instead of twice.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, I mean, so, because, yeah, what you're talking about is a massive, bureaucracy of
Yes.
process and methods in this review. And so maybe I think we were talking about this before, but I kind of think there's a combination piece where I know we were talking about this is sometimes you have to just stop and look back and do kind of
Yeah.
a big deep dive, right? Which is sort of that
Yes.
annual thing. And if you're doing that too often, that takes a lot of effort and energy and time to go through that and write things and document them and,
Yes.
look back and all that. But you also need the regular recurrence kind of stuff too, right?
Right.
Because you got to avoid surprises. Nobody wants to hear that they've been underperforming for the last 4 months, but didn't
Yeah.
find out about it
Because
because
we just
there
didn't
wasn't a
tell you.
scheduled
Right.
thing,
We knew that nobody liked working with you and that it was really challenging, but we waited 7 months to tell you about it, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that is not great.
Yeah. So, and I guess the other interesting thing, because I assume Facebook and Meta, like they were right in it with all the other tech firms running agile and moving to more
Mhm.
agile type of methodology, which was all about shorter,
Yep.
cadence sprints and,
Yes.
epics and things like that. So did that did that roll into the methods at all when you were doing the performance management stuff?
So what it allowed for, because there was, weekly self reviews, regular one-on-ones, project updates and meetings all the time, there were plenty of opportunities to get feedback along the way. So
Yeah.
even though, moving to an annual performance rating cycle was certainly a
Yeah.
big shift in how we calibrate performance and kind of take that step back to give feedback, people in general, I like to think we're getting lots of signal throughout the year. Um, I know it became fashionable for a while for companies to do away with ratings altogether. Yeah,
Yeah.
and, right. Just do continuous feedback, and we're going to have these one-on-ones, and so you're always going to know. I appreciate that. I appreciate regular one-on-ones. I do think it is helpful to step back on some sort of a cadence every 3, 6, 12 months, depending on what makes sense for the business, to reflect on what's happened over the last period. Because from one-on-one to the next, whether it's weekly or biweekly, a lot comes up. There's a lot of noise in that signal. But when you take a step back and you look at the trends and the
Yeah.
themes, and you can see like, oh, well, we explained away this one thing because it made sense in the context of this given one-on-one that something happened or didn't happen. But when you're like, oh, actually, this has now happened 7 times in the last half, there's something else going on here. Let's talk about it, because it's not just a data point here and a data point there, but really there's something kind of maybe deeper going on that we can address systemically versus as a one-off. But kind of like having those moments to step
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. It's so I had a old colleague. It was actually he used this analogy. It was a business development thing because he was talking about how we described the work we did from a
Mhm.
proposal perspective, but it applies here too. I think is just getting out from the trees to see the forest out of
Yes,
the trees, right? You can describe every single tree, but that doesn't help you understand the forest. So
right,
from a big
right.
picture, that whatever 15,000 foot view or 30,000 foot view. No,
The other thing,
definitely it makes sense. So it sounds like then your kind of methodology or strategy for performance management is it kind of a mix between the two where you need those recurring things, but it's also good to have the sort of milestone performance review cycles.
I like to find a balance between the two. And this is the sort of thing where it really depends on the organization, right? I've not like solved performance management and I'll sell you my book
Yeah,
that teaches you how to do this off the
still
shelf
working on
thing.
the book.
That works for every company because companies are so different. And I think again, because it ties back to culture and capability and everything else, you really kind of need to reflect the organization that you're working with. Um, but there are certainly principles that remain the same, right? Being clear about expectations from the start. It's unfair to tell somebody they're not meeting an expectation if they never knew what the expectation was. It's not fair to ding somebody for having a problem for 7 months that you didn't tell them 6 months ago was a problem and give them a chance to correct it.
Yeah.
Um, those sorts of things. The other reason why I like having some sort of kind of take a step back milestone review is it's also a chance to ensure that managers are aligned with one another. We hear so much about people have a good relationship, a not good relationship. They trust their manager. They don't trust their manager. There's fear, anxiety, concern with that. Some managers are hard graders. Some managers are easy graders. And unless we are ensuring that managers are well calibrated to the definition, somebody having the same level of performance on the same team, but under two different managers could be getting very different feedback, which again is unfair. And again, also makes it difficult for people to move around because you don't know what you're going to get. If you're an engineer on one team and you were told this is amazing, the best performance ever, but if a manager on a different team were to assess the same impact, it would look very different. Like, how do you have an inwardly mobile organization, right? How are you ensuring that you're holding a consistent bar for performance? So I like times for leaders to come together and say, okay, what does it look like to you to be meeting expectations? Is that what it looks like to me? Do we need to adjust how we're thinking about this so we can be more consistent?
Yeah. No, you hit a whole bunch of different areas there between part of the whole performance review process or performance management process isn't just evaluating someone, but it's setting the goals and the expectations up front, right? Which makes it a bigger thing. And, most people from my experience, don't necessarily know what it means to, write good goals. I think everyone knows SMART, but how you actually apply that or do it in a way that's effective, I'm not a huge fan of that acronym just because of the way it's just, I think it's overused and like, oh, well, is it specific, measurable, attainable, whatever. I like how Ken Blanchard actually changes it slightly where he says it's specific, motivating, attainable, realistic, and I think his last one is trackable as opposed to time bound. So not just is there an end state, but can you know along the way
is
it
measurable?
Progress?
Yeah, to get measurable in somewhere because he took the M for something else. But it's
true,
still it makes sense though, right? Another client that I'm working with now overhauled their performance program over the course of 2025 was the big change year. And we just closed out calibrations and performance reviews using a brand new rating scale with new labels and new definitions. And a big piece of this, and it ties back to your point about goals, is, really driving towards a high performance culture. Of course, my first question was, what does high performance culture mean to you? Because again, that could look very different. But one of the ways, part of their definition, one of the ways they defined it was raising the bar on performance and what we're expecting of people. And so when they set goals at the beginning of the year, the expectation now is that they're stretch goals, not business as usual goals. So SMART goals, sure, again, it's important to be specific about what we're trying to do. It's important to be able to, measure, are we actually achieving that or not? But from the start, are these goals that are just kind of keeping us business as usual, or are these goals that are really pushing the business forward? And we found, people might have needed to adjust their goals along the way. Once you look at it a little more closely, you're like, this goal might have worked a couple of years ago, but we're striving for more now. We're going to bump up the expectations around this goal, and assess performance against it accordingly then. Because, in the same way Meta was trying to get out of the quick turn cycle of every 6 months, let's, hyper optimize for that specific rating every 6 months. This company, which does reviews once a year also, but has touch points every quarter to check in and make sure we're still aligned.
Yeah.
Do these goals still make sense? Do we need to revisit the priority? Has something moved in what the expectation is? Let's decide that now, make sure we're clear on it and being really intentional about speaking about it, not getting to the end of the year and saying, well, it's not the kind of goal that, we should have had.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, goals get so tricky. The goal theory, like Locke and Latham, they they say a goal should be challenging and specific, right? Those are the
Mhm.
two components that make an effective goal. And the higher you set the bar, typically the more you achieve, even if you don't achieve the goal, right?
Right.
You'll achieve more towards it because you're working towards that, and then you get efficacy that comes in is confidence and stuff. But you don't even have to document a goal for it to be a goal, right? A goal is just an
Right.
aspiration, is something you want. And I think what I've seen in my experience with a lot of performance management systems, particularly in the government, because the way the government does it, it's very templated, right? And the
Yeah.
goals, the way they've written their goals, and I'm working with an organization right now, is they've basically just taken the job description and just written it out as
Yeah.
like,
Put it in
so
bullet
it's
points
just,
and call them
your
goals.
goal is to do your job by doing this and this and this and this and this and having this expectation, this set and this and this and this. And it's like that, those aren't really goals. I guess you could,
Mhm.
I mean, they are kind of goals, or they're outcome goals or something, but it's like, when you're reviewing, where do you focus on? There's no prioritization there. There's no focus. There's no real specificity, I guess. And so anyways, it just becomes a check in the box.
Mhm.
And then the goals aren't really the goals. And so then they're not salient, right? To be able to focus and prioritize on something. Um, but I think one other thing also is that, and I guess one of the things I don't love about the annual piece is that
Mhm.
goals don't necessarily just fit to an annual cycle,
Yes.
right? You might, especially outcome goals, although ideally you want to focus more on performance goals, in my opinion, performance goals of like improving something or increasing something or
Having some
reducing
sort of an
something.
impact.
In which case, if you have a good measure, although sometimes it's hard to find a good measure or actually
Mhm.
track it because it doesn't necessarily make sense or it's not even feasible, those you could do on a more recurring basis. I think you have every quarter you
Right.
check in. How are we doing on this growth area or this performance metric? But outcomes are going to finish based on the tests
Exactly.
and the cycles and all that. And so, do you have you had any things where it's like, what? I guess, how do you address that? Do you like, you can still set goals to end at a certain
Yeah.
time, and you're just going to look back at the end of the
And you
year
assess it
on
when you
how did
assess
it
it,
go?
right? When it
Yeah.
makes sense for the business. Early on in my career, I worked for an organization that did annual reviews, but the cycle was offset by like 3 or 4 months from the uh, like the company's fiscal year. So
Okay.
fiscal or calendar, either way, it doesn't matter. It didn't align with either one, and their
Mhm.
position was similar. I'm like, well, the work gets done on the cycle of the business, when the business needs it to be done. It may or may not line up nicely with, the traditional
Yeah.
calendar, but it is what it is. And we'll assess it, as it makes sense. Um, in some ways I kind of like that because it does just shift the mindset a little bit from being so calendar driven. I think the challenge with a lot of performance programs in general is that um, then everything becomes about that, right? It becomes about trying to match the work to the program rather the program to the work.
Yeah,
But if you
people game it
focus
then, right?
on
It just becomes a game.
exactly,
And I
and
set the
then
goal so that it sounds challenging, but I can make sure I
yes,
can achieve it so that I get my promotion and, you know,
yeah,
all that
yeah,
kind of stuff.
and that's where I talk a lot with teams about something. I'm shifting gears a little bit, but it relates to the timeline a bit. Is that people part of the reason people take performance feedback so personally, so seriously, is because it's ultimately evaluative. It feels judgmental, even when it's good, right? It can feel that way. And so often when I'm talking with teams, I'm like, this performance cycle, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is a chapter in a book of what is hopefully a very long career at this organization. And we can't get too focused on any one chapter as defining who you are as a person. It is a reflection of the work, not of you personally. Of course, they're the person doing it, so I'm not going to tell them to not take it seriously. But my reason for saying that is because I want to give people a little perspective. If it becomes all consuming, I got to meet it by this deadline because of this rating, because of this thing, because of what it means for me as a person or my compensation. again, very personal.
Hmm.
Um, we've lost sight of, uh, you know, doing good work in service of the company's mission, whatever that might be. Um, because it's all meant to just kind of tie back to the game that we've somehow found ourselves in, that nobody started out wanting to play a game. But if we're not intentionally keeping an eye on how we've set up the program, it can fall into the trap, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then the aspect of control within the
Yeah.
goals too, right? Is like ideally you want to be able to set goals that are within your control, but
Yeah.
the reality is in the real world, there's always something that could happen, even if you're able to set a goal that's very highly in
Right.
control. But what about there's two directions I want to go. One
Okay.
is about compensation and linking compensation. But before we get to that,
Okay.
because I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But what about like at the team level? Have you done much with any organizations where they start to look at not just individual goals, but actually setting team goals and how that works, and either fostering or maybe even being a challenge when you've got a slacker that's sort of you know, carrying or
Yeah.
slopping along.
Uh, I have two thoughts. The first is I didn't think you were going to say team goals. I thought you were going to say team performance. So I will answer both because they are related.
Similar. Yeah.
Um, I look at team goals in the context of cascading goals, right? Translating for an individual how the work they're doing, the specific goals they have, feeds into a team goal, which serves a business unit goal, which ultimately serves a company
Okay.
priority.
Like a hierarchy.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say
Goals.
at some companies it's a very hierarchical top-down flow, right? Cascade of goals, which is fine. Other companies, Meta was one, is very bottoms up, where individuals set goals, and then it's kind of on the manager to make sure that it is all still aligning, right? There still needs to be some sort of communication about, is this work you're just kind of doing as a pet project off at the side, a Google 20% thing, or is it in service of a business priority?
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's important for engagement. I think it's important for people to know that what they're doing matters. And so if they can tie a team goal to an individual goal and see how it's connected, I do think it makes an important difference. And I've worked in remote sites outside of headquarters where um, teams may feel a bit more of a sense of alignment or connection to their local site versus, let's say, the company writ large, or kind of the amorphous kind of top line HQ. But the point is, there's still a team that's still connected. They are still working together for a common purpose,
Yeah.
um, and having that sense of belonging is really important. Now, on the team performance side of it, how is the team doing on achieving their goals? Um, I've spent time, I've not put pen to paper yet, but have spent a lot of time thinking about, for as much as I love performance programs where individuals get feedback about what they're doing, it is rare, I think, in our world today that people do work alone, right? They do work in teams with
Yeah.
others. Teams are kind of the unit of performance that I think about, and it's maybe a team of all engineers, finance people, sales people, whatever, working together as a unit to achieve a goal, or it's a cross-functional team that has come together from across the organization in service of a goal. But how do we assess the team's performance and first, and then from there, still make sure that individuals are getting feedback um, as themselves about what they're doing too. And I've done some team level calibrations, which have been really interesting. If we were to assign a rating to this team against the team goal, what rating would
Mm.
we assign? And even within whatever the rating is, say a team exceeds the expectation overall, individuals on that team could have exceeded, they might not have met the expectation. Anybody could still have their own individual rating as a result, but I think it's an interesting exercise for a leadership group to go through to assess, um, if we were to rate the work itself collectively, because the work gets done in a collective, what would that be, and how would we
Yeah.
we take it then to the next step?
Yeah. Because if I mean, Well, if you get into like the difference between a group and a team, right, where a group is a bunch of people working towards a goal potentially, but it's their input is not interrelated, it's not interdependent. So you can focus on an individual contribution because at the end of the, hey, I got a business team. Our target is to sell $1 million worth of whatever, and one person's pulling half of those sales and the others less. There's no interdependence there, but a lot of teams now, they're very complex. I wonder if it almost makes sense, and I've read some stuff on this as well, where you don't have individual goals, you only have team goals. And does that actually help bring the team together? Because now they're not so worried about or focused on what their individual contribution is. It's about how do they contribute to the overall, end state for the team. But that's where, team context is more complicated than a one-to-one context. And
Absolutely. And I think how clear are expectations? Because if we're part of a team that's working towards a team goal, that's lovely, but we're also going to be doing individual things.
Yeah.
And that could be adding or detracting from the goal. And so how do we receive feedback that course corrects or reinforces or encourages us to keep going? If we don't have clear expectations about what our role in that is.
Yeah, and I was going to say it all comes back to expectations. Do you understand what is expected of you in the first place, and then are you performing, against those expectations? So before we wrap up, I think we've got enough time maybe for a quick discussion on compensation. I think we may have brought this up before, but what are your thoughts on linking compensation and pay to performance management, goal setting, evaluations?
My thinking on this has evolved. I'm smiling because I was literally just exchanging messages with somebody about this yesterday.
Yeah.
I come from an organization. Meta was very tightly connected on pay and performance, inextricably linked. A very detailed performance rating scale that drove formulaic compensation outcomes, which is also why the rating becomes so important then, because the rating drives merit, bonus, equity, positioning in a comp band. And so again, it carries a lot of weight, right? Whatever this rating is going to be. And what I like about that is that it's formulaic and we can be consistent in how we apply it and not have managers managing individual merit budgets and a lot of bad practices and biases can creep in when that sort of a thing happens. So I like the formulaic nature of it, but I've really come around over the last year or so to a world where I'm much more a fan of market-based base pay. We pay what the role is. And I do think there's still a world where there's a performance-based bonus or some sort of variable compensation in recognition of good performance. But on base pay, it's getting too far down a line. It breeds a lot of the bad habits that we try to get away from on the gameplay and things like that. So I've come around on market-based, and I've always been a fan. We changed this at an organization I worked with previously, where it used to be raises kind of happened, I don't want to say haphazardly, but perhaps off cycle. There wasn't necessarily a very specific merit cycle, but we moved towards that, and that was great because we could be a bit more systematic about it. I think it relieved a lot of background anxiety for employees. We're like, I need to bring it up. This is an awkward conversation to have. I might not feel comfortable doing it, but am I going to ever get a merit increase if I'm not the one to ask it? Managers are ill prepared to have those conversations. So I liked at least moving us in that direction. But even so, I've come even more around towards let's just do market-based pay.
Yeah.
And have some consistency on the bonus side, but not so much on base.
Yeah, I mean, the science of motivation would say, like, if you're creating those contingencies, right, it becomes an imposition, the judgmental aspect of the performance, and you're making what could be a more integrated or even intrinsic type of role more external. or imposed, right? By linking those very directly. I mean, there has to be a relationship. If you're underperforming, I mean, it's got to affect your pay, or at least, or maybe, I mean, I guess it doesn't have to, but it could just affect longevity or your ability to stay in that role.
Right.
But yeah, it's tough. And I've been actually, my business partner and we've been having some discussions about, like, do we want to do off cycle or on cycle? Because it's so much easier to handle raises at the end of a contract option or at the end of a fiscal year. Budget wise is just so much simpler, and planning and all of that. But people, again, it's the same thing as goal setting. I think people don't just work on an annual basis where it's like, well, it's December 31st. And just as expected, you hit the exact point of growth that we were expecting, and now it's time for your promote. It's like, no, there might be a time in the middle of the year where it's like, man, you're taking on more responsibility, or you've accreted to a certain level, and we want to reward that and recognize that and increase salary or a bonus, whatever, right?
Right.
There's different ways to do that. But I think from motivation theory perspective, I think a big piece of it is it recognizing I guess making known or salient the need satisfaction, right? The growth, the accomplishment, or is it used as a contingency, like a if then, right? That's where I think you want to avoid it. And that's what I think happens with those performance reviews. Like you said, if it's very strongly linked, then they know that this is a if then. If I don't get a 3 or above, then I'm not going to get this X amount of salary or bonus. It's the same in the government, and so now work becomes external.
Right.
By default.
And I think there's so much that we can do to save everybody the heartache and anxiety of going through that. And bringing some consistency to a system and some rhythm of it really helps with that. It's also, I think, very inefficient to pay people one-off adjusting these things or managing the budget. And even if it's on a cycle, but we're still kind of spending some sort of a merit budgets these days are not usually very large, right? When you add up the time, the salary of the HR folks and the managers and the VPs who are reviewing all of these recommendations, we've probably just spent that much in reviewing bureaucracy. But if we could make it formulaic, tied to market data, tied to, things that can help us remove bias from the situation, be more consistent in how we approach it, it saves time and money, even just on the processing side.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I would love to keep talking because I could keep going. We were just starting to scratch the surface into the motivation stuff. But we're at time.
We'll go for days otherwise.
So yeah, and I don't want to have to spend 50 hours editing the podcast, although there's very limited editing. There's nothing I need to cut out. So, but before we wrap, I assume you're still probably out and always open for new clients and stuff.
Yes.
So if there's any plugs you want to make, or if you want to share how people can get in touch with you, I'll turn it over to you for that, and then we can wrap.
Thank you. Yes, I am always open to talking to new organizations. You can find me on LinkedIn at Amanda Zeidman, or at A to Z Human Resources Consulting, or online at a2zhumanresourcesconsulting.com. World's longest URL, it feels like sometimes. But it is there. My email and everything is there. You can book time from there. Like I said, love working on performance programs, but I'm also just so interested in other facets of the HR space too. So if you ever just need a thought partner, someone to bounce ideas off of, sometimes being an HR leader is a lonely job and you want to have a sounding board for some things that you're working on, I am happy to be that person.
Awesome. Very good.
Thank you so
well,
much.
no, I
This
really
has been so much
appreciate it. Yeah, no, this was great. I love these conversations. So this is really cool. Hopefully helpful for people to hear about performance management stuff. And again, I think we could keep going with other stories. And
absolutely.
things like that. Thanks again.
Thank you.